starting with our inspiring remarks from the highest-ranking transgender elected official in the United States, Delaware's State Senator Sarah McBride. Sarah will also introduce and facilitate the important discussion with some of my fellow HRC youth ambassadors. We'll discuss how to best support trans and non-binary youth, as well as best practices to create a more equitable future. As a transgender young person, the support of my mom, my family and friends has been so impactful on my own journey. When allies show their support, they contribute to a better outcome for making everyone, regardless of their background, feel included. As you listen to Senator McBride, I hope you see the boundless potential of trans and non-binary youth when given a chance to thrive. As you listen to my fellow youth ambassadors, I hope you think about how you can create a more welcoming environment for trans and non-binary youth, especially our trans and non-binary youth of color. Thank you for joining us, and without further ado, let's extend a big virtual welcome to Senator McBride.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah McBride. I am the brand new state senator for Delaware's 1st State Senate District. But most importantly, I am the former National Press Secretary at HRC. I am so excited to be back with you all virtually at Time to Thrive. Some of my favorite memories at HRC were our Time to Thrive conferences, joining you all in places like DC and Orlando and elsewhere to talk about how we can better support and work with LGBTQ youth, which brings me to today's conversation. One of my favorite parts of my job at HRC was working with members of the LGBTQ community across the country, especially young LGBTQ people. I found so much inspiration, and frankly, I learned so much getting to work with HRC's youth ambassadors, who are an incredible cross-section of young advocates and activists who are on the front lines of change in their own communities, who are blazing trails, and who are educating not just their own communities, but this country about what it means to be LGBTQ and young. And today we have an exciting conversation with 4 incredibly brilliant, bold, beautiful, wonderful trans and non-binary youth ambassadors. And they're going to talk to us a little bit more about their own experiences, and most importantly, their perspectives on how we can amplify the voices, support the needs, and fight alongside trans and non-binary young people for full equality up and down government in every sector of our society. And so with that, I'd love to welcome the 4 incredible trans and non-binary youth ambassadors who are joining me today. I'm so excited for this conversation. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules. One thing I know about youth ambassadors is that you all are incredibly busy. I don't know how you find time to sleep. And so I really appreciate you taking the time. And you don't sleep, but you all look perfect and beautiful despite not sleeping, which is just incredible trans magic. I'm really excited for our conversation. And before we dive in, I'd love each one of you to introduce yourself, to share your name, your pronouns, what state you're from. Anyone from Delaware gets extra credit points, although I don't think that's the case. And then any identities you'd like to share with us. So Viandre, why don't you start?
All right. Thank you for that introduction. That was so sweet. I'm like heartful. But I'm Viandre Mitchell. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a proud trans woman of color, and I'm from Seattle. And I'm one of the new 2021 HRC Youth Ambassadors.
Sam, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you, Sarah. My name is Sam Moehlig. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am from sunny San Diego, California. And I identify as a gay transgender man.
Sunny California. I'm jealous, especially this time of year. Nakiya, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nakiya. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a genderqueer, Black queer person from Maryland.
Maryland's not far from Delaware, so you get some extra credit points for that. Jalen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jalen. I am Jalen Smith. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm from South Pasadena, California, and I am a queer trans man, and I will be joining the cohort as well as Beyondre.
Thank you so much. You know, one of the things that I think is so powerful in creating change is folks sharing their own stories, sharing their own journeys. Obviously, we know our journey to coming out isn't the end of the story. And oftentimes the most exciting and interesting parts of our journey are after we come out. But I think it is helpful for folks to hear a little bit about our own journey to self-discovery, whether they're listening and working through those feelings themselves, or whether they're trying to gain a deeper understanding of our wonderful experiences as trans people. I think that origin story is so important. And so I'm curious, when you all first realized you were trans and non-binary. And so Beyondre, why don't you start? When did you first realize that you were trans?
Well, for me, it was something that just always felt right. It felt like I always knew, but I just didn't know how to explain it until I got older. But as I got older, I started to experience in my transition before I even came out, started to start. And that's how it became more gradual. So basically, I came out at the young age of 7 in 3rd grade. And I told my mom that I'm a girl, and it all made sense. And right before that, she had been suspecting a little bit. So she went to a few advocacy groups that taught her about everything. And she explained to me what transgender is. And it just all clicked. And I finally got to be me.
That's beautiful. And what a wonderful, wonderful blessing to have a parent who sees that and prepares themselves even before you might know that that's something you want to share.
Agreed.
Sam, how about you?
Bouncing off of what Beyondre said, again, I realized when I was very young, I didn't necessarily know I was trans, but I always felt that I was different. I just didn't have the words to describe that. But the moment for me came when I was in preschool, because they line you up at the end of the day, boys over here, girls over here, and all the boys would run out the door to get their things for the day, and I would run with them, and all the girls would yell at me, and they'd say, "No, Sam, come back, you're a girl." And I'd look at them and I say, "No, I'm not." And I turn around and walk out with the rest of the boys, because in my heart, that's where I knew I belonged.
That's wonderful. And it reminds me of the power of some of the work that HRC's Welcoming Schools program is doing to really break down those gender stereotypes, even in kindergarten and in early elementary school, because they can, if you're in the right environment, it can be a period of self-discovery. And if you're in the wrong environment, it can be a source of shame. Nakiya, tell us about your journey to self-discovery.
It was different. It was like I always knew that I was something, but I never realized that meant I was something. Like, I never felt like what I thought a woman should feel like, but I just thought that nobody felt like that. And it wasn't until I graduated high school and I met my best friend, and they're agender, and they introduced me to like all these different ways that you could be yourself. And I like got really into Janelle Monáe and saw like the way she expressed herself and her queerness as a gender non-conforming person. I was like, I think there's something to that non-binariness. Hold up. So I looked more into it, and I came out as non-binary before I found my more me-fitting identity of genderqueer specifically.
It's amazing how powerful an example, a single person who's living authentically, publicly, how powerful that can be for us. Jalen, how about you?
Well, similar to everyone else, I also knew at a very, very young age, but in a way that I, didn't know how to communicate it, just because I knew that I was different, but I didn't, associate being trans with, I guess, transitioning and everything like that. But I was just really, really grateful for, I guess, the opportunity just to be listened to later on in life, because I did come out when I was like 17, and that was like 2 years ago. But it was kind of a big thing with like self-expression through clothing. And I think that was a really, I guess, key part of my identity.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And thank you all for sharing those stories. One of the things that I think we see a lot, particularly in our politics, is a misunderstanding of who trans people are, and particularly a misunderstanding of who trans and non-binary young people are. We've seen that because politicians have put forward really egregious and harmful stereotypes. But we have that also because sometimes even quote unquote affirming portrayals can limit what people see and reinforce stereotypes. And so I'm curious, what do you think people typically don't understand or don't know or might have misconceptions on when it comes to trans and non-binary youth? And sorry, I should call on someone. Nakiya, how about you?
Yeah, I feel like the biggest misconception in the spaces that I've encountered have always been that there's only one specific way to be trans or non-binary, and that, especially for non-binary people, it always looks like a white, AFAB, skinny, androgynous person. And that's not true. And especially like growing up as a young person who's Black, it was like weird trying to figure out my identity and not even realizing that there was an option for me to be something other than like a cis woman, because I didn't see myself represented in any media, you know?
Absolutely. And the fact that our community is as diverse as the fabric of humanity is one of the best parts of our community, if not the best part of our community, and two, such an important thing for people to understand. And oftentimes they don't know that because they don't necessarily see it on their TV. Jalen, I'm curious what you think is a misconception or what people don't understand about trans and non-binary youth.
Yeah, so one thing I really wanted to communicate was that I was getting a lot of people asking friends of mine, like, oh, why do you include pronouns and stuff? And I wanted to say, like, introducing or listing pronouns isn't specific to just trans people and non-binary people. And I think that it's kind of difficult because that further alienates trans people. And it's more about making it a more inclusive environment. So I said that, yeah, it just further contributed to alienating trans people. And that also another problem was that, being trans is not something that someone needs to figure out. It's, it's a part of someone. And I think people treat it like it's some kind of enigma, or even considered a threat. So that's just something that I feel like people just don't understand.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, and one that I think is so important for us to reinforce, that we should be making spaces more inclusive when it comes to gender in a universal way. And so I really appreciate you saying that. Sam, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I definitely think one of the things that people don't always understand is when these very young trans youth at the age of 4 or 5 come out and they go to, oh, you're so young, how can you know? When not very many individuals know that the part of our brain actually develops the sense of who we are before our genitalia does. And so when a doctor says, oh, it's a boy, it's a girl, that doesn't define who we are, and that we already have a great sense of who we are by the time we're by the age 3 or 5. And so following the lead of the child is truly the best way to go on with their journey.
Excellent perspective. I think sometimes people think that when we're talking about this, it's some sort of logical decision-making process, like, what job should I take? But it's so much more visceral than that. And I think your point is spot on. Viandre, how about you? What are your thoughts?
I think in the media for a long time, we've been painted to be the butt of the joke in a lot of TV series, movies, and, that's one of the things that is main representation within everybody's society. And, we are rare and youth are rare to be trans, but that doesn't mean we're impossible to be possible. we're still possible to be here, living and existing. And a lot of people just don't like to believe that or see that and see past that. They like to see what is the norm and genders with society. So just seeing that we're here and living and proud is key for me.
Trans people are real. Amen to that. Yes.
Exactly.
So my next question actually ties into the different way we're conducting this conversation. We are obviously all virtual. We are not in person on a stage right now. And as we go through this pandemic, one of the challenges is we're doing so much virtually, and we can't access the support and the counselors and the educators and all of the other youth serving professionals that we're used to seeing at school or in person. And so I'm curious your thoughts how folks can support trans and non-binary youth virtually. And so why don't we start with Jalen? I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, so I would say to establish yourself as an ally early on, and just so I guess students will feel welcome, and introducing pronouns and keeping office hours open, and also including resources available to make sure that people feel supported and they have the resources necessary for them to feel, I guess, safe.
Being extra proactive when students can't see the classroom or can't see the office that might have a rainbow flag, things like that, that early indication is key. Nakiya, curious what you think.
I would say continuously reaching out would be important to me. I feel like, a lot of times in person, like you said, it's about like the signifiers that you have. But I think youth tend to feel more disconnected when they're not constantly having things in their face. So to just have someone who is an ally to you at school or wherever you were reaching out to you, reminding you that they're still there for you would be a good idea.
Thank you. Sam, how can folks support trans and non-binary youth remotely?
Similar to Jalen, I definitely think those little things, just having a trans pin or putting your pronouns in your email, or at least for me, one of my teachers who did not know I was trans just made a comment about something and said, oh, my father is very conservative, but my daughter came home and introduced us to her girlfriend and said, you know what, love is love. And I love my daughter. And so sort of just having that, yes, I was raised this way, but at the end of the day, I love my child, and sort of putting them first and being willing to change how they see the world.
That's great, sort of sharing those experiences. Viandre, curious, how can folks support young people, trans and non-binary young people remotely?
I'd say that just hearing from your colleagues and other youth professionals, even if you're not close to them, is such a heartwarming thing. And when you hear from them, even if it's like just a simple "how are you," it's so affirming and nice to hear, because we're separated from each other and we don't get to see each other. We're so isolated, and just knowing that you're still there is a big thing for me, because it just doesn't feel like that. And when it does, and when those feelings are brought into somewhere where you're feeling isolated, it feels 10 times better.
One of the things that obviously is so important and great about Time to Thrive is that it provides youth serving professionals really great examples of success stories and also important examples of instances where youth serving professionals have fallen short. And so I'm curious for each one of you, what is one standout moment you've had with a youth serving professional, whether it's positive or negative, and how did this moment impact you? Viandre, how about you?
Well, as I said, when I was in 3rd grade, I came out, and it was pretty widely known by the public in my area. We were a more conservative town, and I was one of the first Black trans women to be present. So, I was one of the people that was representation for everybody. But that became widely known, and I had got called by CPS, and they came unannounced into my school. And it was kind of a traumatic experience for me because they just came in, called me down to the office, and asked these just questions that should not be asked for a 7-year-old child. But, you know, some of them would be including like, is your mom abusive? And is she forcing you to do this? And, you know, soon they found out that no, this is my decision and she's not abusing me at all. She's literally just letting me be who I am.
I'm so sorry that you had that experience, but I'm glad that you were able to stand up for yourself. Nakiya, curious your formative experience that you've had with a youth serving professional, positive or negative.
So I actually spent a lot of my childhood in foster care. And when I was in foster care, I moved around a lot and I ended up moving to this super conservative, majority white area my senior year of high school. I was there around the same time that a certain president was elected. So it was like anything went, and people were just being super just disrespectful to any minority, especially around the time of the election. And teachers were just not saying anything. And it was just so jarring to me because of how like it's always preached, oh, you can't talk about this at school, you're not supposed to talk about your opinions at school. And these kids were just full on bullying these openly trans and queer people in front of the teachers, and they just weren't doing anything. And that really said a lot to me about like where I was and what space I was in. And it made me feel as though transness wasn't something that I could just explore and be casually. It was something that I would have to reserve until like a later point in my life where I was safer. And it made me think about how there was no such thing as just being casually any marginalized identity. It was always just, you can be yourself when you're around people who are going to be affirming of that. And you can't just wake up and decide who you are one day, you know, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so powerfully said, and such a reminder that being a good person isn't just refraining from bad actions, it's stepping in, it's actual positive action. Sam, curious your experience.
Yes, mine thankfully is slightly more positive. I did, at the age of 6 years old, I started a martial art called Taekwondo. And before you become a black belt, they call you by your name. So they called me Sam. So no one knew whether I was male or female. And I loved the sport. I was there 5 days a week, 3 to 4 hours a day for almost 10 years. And by the time I hit puberty, I didn't want to go anymore. And I got my black belt and they started calling me Miss Moehlig. And I told my mom, I'm done. I want to quit. I can't do this anymore. And when I transitioned, my mother was kind enough to go to the staff and explain Sam is trans, use male pronouns. This is who he is. He loves it here. And I really want him to feel safe. And the staff just said, we don't understand this. We don't know what's making this happen, but we love Sam. And we'll do whatever it takes to make him feel safe and comfortable here. And so I became Mr. Moehlig from then on.
Nice. One of the things we talked about earlier was the full diversity of the trans community. And you know, we all know that we bring our whole selves to the table, even if society sometimes reduces us to one identity or limits us to one identity and how they see and talk about us. We know we're so much more, and we know we bring multiple identities to the table. And I'm curious how your gender identity interacts with other identities you hold dear, and what do you want educators and other youth serving professionals to know about supporting students who have multiple marginalized identities? And so Sam, we'll go to you first.
Sure. Well, it's one of my intersecting identities besides being gay and transgender is I'm also disabled. I have what's called fetal alcohol syndrome, or FAS. My birth mother drank, and it quite literally caused holes to be made in my brain due to the alcohol exposure. And so around the age of 8 or 9, I began to have these fits and just tantrums. And it was my gender dysphoria coming out and me trying to tell people how I felt. And all of my doctors dismissed it every time my mom said, I think that there's a gender piece here. And they kept saying, no, 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 no. Sam's just confused because of the brain damage. And so they kept putting it back to it's because of the brain damage, thinking that it was part of my FAS, that it was just how I was going to be for the rest of my life. And when finally someone diagnosed me back then with gender dysphoria disorder, I think it was, they were like, oh, it's not the FAS. There is a gender connected piece. And so I think that was a huge part of my growing up, was having to separate those two pieces of my identity.
Nakiya, curious your perspective on how your gender identity interacts with your other identities, and what folks should know about living at the intersection of multiple marginalized identities.
My gender identity, especially interacts with my Blackness in like the best way possible. I feel like just very much myself and very much connected to my cultural history and my ancestral history. And I think what people need to know a lot more about transness is that it's not just about, it doesn't look one specific way, and that pre-colonization, almost everybody could be casually trans in the first place. So that's just one thing. And then the other thing is like hosting spaces for queer and gay people and trans people. I feel like it's important to be inclusive and intersectional, and to be as like, I don't want to say accommodating, but welcoming as possible to anybody who could come into any space, because, transness just doesn't look one way. And to have a space that's only geared to cis gay men or only geared to X, Y, and Z isn't inclusive even of the community culturally,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Viandre, curious your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, I'd say already I'm singled out for my skin color, living in a conservative area. So when you add another layer to that of being trans, it can get hard. And another thing is that even within my Black community, I am discriminated against on just because I'm trans, and there's a lot of stigmas within the community. And you'd think that like you could have your community's back and that, it's gonna be all okay, but it's not always that situation. And so we're constantly having our guard up. And, that's what happens with intersectionality. But some ways you can help that is just be accommodating, be welcoming, and question yourself before you do anything in the workspace if you're perpetuating a stereotype on somebody that is just here, present, and a normal person.
Thank you for that. And one of the things that I think I hear consistently from folks talking about how their identities intersect, and it goes, Viandre, to your point, is that sometimes they feel like they have to choose who they are depending on what space they're in. And to your point around that, additionally, there's prejudice in the LGBTQ community. That there's racism, there's xenophobia, there's Islamophobia, there's misogyny and sexism, there's classism, there's fat phobia, right? We have to recognize that the LGBTQ community is not immune to those prejudices either, far from it. Jalen, one of the things we were talking about before is that is the impact that the behavior of youth-serving professionals could have, or more broadly, that adults can have, the impact that they can have. And I'm curious, when you felt left out or unsupported, and when you felt that way, when an adult could make a difference, what could have been done differently to make you feel included, safe, and affirmed? How have adults either stepped up or failed to step up in your experience?
So I don't have like a particular moment that I can recall. In my experience, it was mainly just times, like too many times to count, that something was said about me, and maybe it's like a joke or something, and it's not really sitting with me, but it's in the presence of educators like all the time, and it's more of just this bystanding role that they take, and they're not intervening in any way. And that, I feel, it would make the biggest difference, I know, for me and for other people, is if something was said, or they don't let it go. But that is something that I really would think that would make a difference, if an educator would just step in. Yeah.
Thank you. Nakiya, curious for you.
Yeah, I have the exact same thing to say. Like, it's all about, just being an active ally. I've had, like, a lot of adults or youth serving professionals come to me like later after something has happened where they didn't say something and say, oh, well, that was wrong. And it's like, then why didn't you say that when it was happening? Why did you, kind of let me be the odd one out? Why did you step up when it was happening? And it's always, kind of, especially in school environments, it's a battle of, oh, the school board's not going to back me, or, oh, I don't know, X, Y, and Z is going to happen. But to a child, I'm not trying to hear all of that in the moment. I'm not trying to hear how you couldn't have done X, Y, and Z when you could have, and you just told me that you wanted to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sam, curious your perspective on this.
Of course. I definitely think one of the biggest times I felt left out was in those transitioning years in between elementary school and middle school, because we all know how much fun middle school is. Am I right? After PE, I was homeschooled, so I did a private class with a few other homeschoolers. And we would always play on the playground afterward, and it was fun for a while. Except these kids started to follow me around and corner me, and they would say, okay, so what are you? Are you a boy or a girl? Are you even human? And I was pestered, I was chased, and obnoxiously asked these questions. And so eventually, because I had longer hair, but I dressed like a male, they resorted to calling me it, because I didn't fit in the stereotypical male or female box. So it was all right for them to call me an inanimate object. And there were coaches 10 to 15 feet from these things that were happening to me, and they just watched me run from these kids for 2 years, and they definitely failed to step up and help me when I needed it.
I'm so sorry to hear that, but thank you so much for sharing. Beyondre, I'm curious your experience when as an adult, maybe not either stepped up or not stepped up.
One thing I've been really unsupported with by an adult was when I went to church with my pastor. We had been going to the church for about 2 years, and it was a pretty nice experience from what we saw until this thing happened. But after one of the Sunday settings, he just sat my mom down and had a talk with her. And he told my mom, well, I have a message from God, and it's very urgent right now. And he said that I'm going to hell if I do not stop wearing girls' clothes. And to that, my mom was like, well, sorry, that's just who she is. That's how she identifies. And if you don't like that, I'm sorry, but it's just not going to be up to you. And so he said that we were not allowed to go to the church after, unless if I came back in boys' clothes or gender neutral clothes. And it was just a really hurtful experience, because that church was somewhere where I felt really loved, and it was somewhere where I just felt one with my spirituality. And it really was hard to come back from that to believe in a higher power above me. And, being in a conservative area, there was a lot of religion everywhere. And, I had that to relate to, but I couldn't anymore, because I just felt singled out, not only with my religion, but with the person who kicked me out of the church. So it was definitely an experience, but, a solution for that is LGBTQ based churches. We can start having pastors that are of the LGBTQ and queer community, and just base it around that and make it known that it's okay to be that, because it took me a long time to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's creating those types of communities. It is such a critical thing for us. And you can be LGBTQ and a person of faith. You can be a person of faith and pro LGBTQ. Those aren't mutually exclusive, and we need to reinforce that message as often as possible. Two more questions. you know, in Time to Thrive, we always try to have folks take away tangible steps that they can take to support LGBTQ youth. And so I'm curious, in one sentence, what is one of the most powerful actions conference attendees can take to support, affirm, and uplift trans and non-binary youth in their lives? So Nakiya, how about we go to you?
My one sentence is just to do what they ask you to do. Youth know the best way to serve youth, and I'm getting older, and everybody's going to get older because that's just how life works. So, you can't always turn to the same voices. You're going to have to keep that allyship current and keep it active.
Absolutely. Viandre, I'm curious your perspective.
Yes, I would say that putting us at the forefront would be amazing. I mean, if we are comfortable, if we're not comfortable, don't put us on display, but putting us out there and making us known in a representation in society is amazing, because then it has more acceptance and more equity within everybody.
Trans youth can lead and should lead.
Exactly.
Sam, curious your thoughts.
Definitely something I think that it's important for attendees to take away from things like Time to Thrive are starting to move away from gendered language and getting to move into, like, coming back to their schools with books, or going outside the classroom and looking on YouTube videos, volunteering to be the leader of a GSA, things like that, just because you don't have to know everything about the community in order to connect with these youth. Just by being in the space and being that safe person for them to go to, that makes all the difference in the world on a school campus.
Thank you so much for that. And Jalen, curious, what's something conference attendees can do to support trans and non-binary youth?
Yeah, so I would say promote and enforce nothing less than what is expected, which is just respect for trans youth, and that's upholding it, and making your spaces I guess more inclusive for those who may feel unwelcomed.
Thank you for that. And I have one more question I want to ask each of you before we close out. I think right now one of the things that a lot of people struggle with is finding hope. And sometimes hope is obvious. Sometimes it sort of hits you right in the face, but then other times you have to go searching for hope. And I'm curious, what makes you hopeful right now? Sam?
I think that something that gives me hope right now is watching other trans men who are older than me and getting to talk to them about their experiences and saying, oh, what was this like when you first got a job interview and they found out you were trans? And just sort of having that hand reaching out to you, so that way I have the information to be able to reach back and help someone else who may be behind me.
Thank you. Nakiya?
I would say what makes me hopeful is kind of just recognizing where I am and everything that I've accomplished. I think that this pandemic really forced a lot of people to take a step back, and as an anxious person, it was like so weird at first. It felt like I was paralyzed, that I had no control over anything, like all my goals were on hold. And then I don't know, I realized like I'm exactly so cool, and like high school me would feel super proud of me and be like super into everything that I've accomplished. And I also realized that I'm in my early 20s, and I'm living like the stories that older people tell around like their grandchildren and their children and their friends, and they're talking about all these crazy adventures they had. Like, I'm here, and I just kind of reminding myself that I've accomplished so much and that I'm just in complete control, and these are like the golden years, and I just have to make sure that I maintain that hope so that I can have fun stories to pass on to people, and I can continue to be everything that would make a past me proud. Just makes me hopeful.
I love that. Jalen, what makes you hopeful right now?
I would say just looking at where I've come and how far I've come. And I think just the fact that I'm on this panel with everyone now is great. and having these conversations that are just really, I think, really important. And not only that, just Sarah, like having trans representation in legislature.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Viandre, what leaves you hopeful right now?
Well, I don't know if a lot of you know, but I'm a big trans advocate online for my community. So I'm constantly educating, telling my stories, and just sharing the world of my experiences so people can learn from them. And when I get that feedback, when I hear that I've either touched somebody or I've ever given somebody that chance where they could get educated, is all the difference for me, because that is my goal in the end, and it just keeps me going. So I just love that response.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to each one of you for sharing some time with me, for motivating me, for educating me, and for sharing your just incredible brilliance with me. It's been an absolute honor to listen to each one of you share your thoughts and perspectives and experiences. I know the folks watching have gained a lot from this conversation. And to close us out, what I'll say is that I'm hopeful, having seen you all and having the chance to listen to you all, learn from you all. Because at the end of the day, for me, thinking back to when I was a young person, I still hope I'm considered a young person, but when I was a teenager, the idea that I could live my truth and pursue my dreams seemed so impossible that it was incomprehensible. And now to see so many young trans and non-binary people doing just that, living their truth and dreaming big dreams all at the same time, shows me how far we've come. And then the fact that you all are taking that and living authentically, walking forward or moving forward from a place of pride to bring about more change, and ensuring that each one of you sets forth at what RFK called a tiny ripple of hope, that when met with others creates a current so great that it can knock down the highest walls of oppression and persecution. And so I am hopeful because of each one of you and the example you show for so many other people and the change that you're bringing. So thank you so much. And thanks to all those who joined us. Let's go forward. Let's make change. Let's support our trans and non-binary youth. And let's amplify and lift up their voices, because they will lead us moving forward.
I still want to make this last forever. I see me and you as sky black and blue. Your eyes don't lie, you make me see the truth. One life, our life, always be together.
So I've been asking a lot of questions of each of you. Do you all have any questions for one another?
I do. I want to ask you guys, how are you doing with mental health? Being isolated is it's just not a thing that is very enjoyable. And it can leave you with your thoughts. And how do you guys get away from those thoughts? And how do you stay happy? And how do you stay busy?
That's a question. I think for me, this pandemic has really taught me that like there's no like one solution for just everything all the time. It's really forced me to see things as way less black and white as I thought they were before we were quarantined. I was like working towards so much stuff, and I was like, and then I'm gonna get there, and when I get to this destination, I'll be happy, and I won't have any anxiety, and everything will be fine, and everything came crashing down. And it really forced me to analyze like what I was working towards and what I was living for, and just reminding myself to stay present, and that, you know, that self-care isn't just this one thing that you can do once and like you'll fix everything. That it's just like, if something doesn't work, you find a bunch of other options. Like, you know, just the pursuit of the trying and realizing that in that pursuit is the happiness, and not you're pursuing the happiness and then you get there. So I've just been trying everything. I got some crossword puzzles. I've been coloring. I got a skateboard. Going on walks with my best friend, watching movies, watching childhood cartoons, doing makeup for no reason, just letting myself exist in joy in the moment, the same way that I could just find myself being anxious for no reason, just finding no reason to just be happy, you know? And also talking to y'all. Like, I love talking to you guys and just seeing how well y'all are doing, especially V with your internet activism and just seeing how like far you guys are going and being able to like have these spaces. Like, I could go on. Let me let somebody else talk.
I totally agree. And, you know, being off with your thoughts, I also relate to that. It's just, I have a hard time taking time for myself. And I also just, it's just a hard time to take for myself, simply.
I definitely agree with Nakiya. Like, talking to y'all is one of the highlights of however often we do talk. Just getting, I don't necessarily think it's about talking to someone else who's trans or who's non-binary, but it's just like, you feel me. Like, we just connect on like this entirely separate level that I may not connect with to anybody else. For mental health, I definitely try. I don't know about y'all, but I love to exercise, and it sort of just takes that internal stress off my body and sort of calms me. If it can calm me physically, it'll calm me emotionally as well as mentally. So that's been a huge part of my routine. And showers, I find that just like, for some reason, like washing my hair, I just feel like 1,000 times better after I've done that. But no, I think definitely connecting with people as much as possible has been a big, big help. And hearing like how you all stay busy in that way, I'm like, ooh, that's a good idea. Like, maybe I'll be like Nakiya and try a crossword. But definitely, I think that's one of the biggest pieces for my mental health.
Nakiya brought up a really interesting point. I think quarantine has been like the time for just nostalgia. And it's just so odd, just because watching old movies, old TV shows, or listening to really, really like old, maybe 2000s music is just so, it's just such a vibe. But yeah, I think quarantine has also taught me that, you know, relationships are really, really important, and keeping them alive is also super, super important. And just the little small gestures that you make every day, whether you check up on someone or FaceTime someone, it just, you know, it not only does something for that person, but it also does it for yourself. So yeah, that's a big part of my self-care. And just the small things, like maybe like, you know, playing piano, or drawing, or yeah, watching a funny video. It's just all the little things.
I actually realized that though we are isolated, it's actually really helps with my independence, because now I'm sort of, I don't want to say I'm forced to learn how to cook and do my laundry, but it's definitely teaching me for those skills that it turns out I'm not going to live with my family forever, and people aren't going to be doing my laundry for me. And so it's sort of giving me that step whilst not being around people, but I'm still learning how to adult in the new adult world. But I am also curious, Sarah, what about you? What are you doing for mental health?
Well, a couple thoughts came to my mind. One, I don't think anyone can call any music from the 2000s really old. Also, Sam, super jealous that you enjoy working out. I would give anything to enjoy working out, because that would at least allow me to work out. And on the flip side of working out, I've been eating a lot and cooking a lot as self-care. I did not grow up cooking. I did not develop skills in college. Ramen was my best friend. This pandemic has unleashed my inner chef. And I started with HelloFresh, sort of the bumper bowling of cooking, but I've graduated to actually being able to cook real meals that I can put together sort of from scratch. And now I'm getting into baking, which is a whole nother dangerous endeavor on my part, especially since I don't enjoy working out. But it's great. I love it. I'm taking care of myself through the joy of the art of cooking.
Bringing up a point that Jalen brought was keeping those relationships alive has been really hard for me, because it's like, you don't always want to be on your phone 24/7, and literally the only way of communication now is your phone and electronics. So, you know, one thing I was really scared for going into being a youth ambassador was getting to know the YAs. But after we had our first meeting, we had like a big Zoom call, and it was the best thing ever. I would have to say. And we just got to know each other, and it was so heartwarming, because I didn't think that could still happen being virtual, and it was really cool. So just wanted to put that in.
It is amazing how we as much as eager as I am to get back to in person, it is amazing how we have figured out how to connect in such non-traditional ways. And I think there's a lot that we're going to take from this that will hopefully be, I think, helpful after the pandemic. I mean, the fact that we have allowed ourselves to connect virtually, I think is going to allow us to stay connected to people who don't live in our physical community. And hopefully that means that even after the pandemic, we'll be able to connect deeply with people who live in different cities and states and countries, like we've been doing throughout this pandemic.
I still want to make this last